So I'm sure you saw us doing the rock, paper, scissors up here. That's how we decided that I would go first tonight. I am going to read you, tonight I am reading from one long essay, but I'm going to divide it into small parts, and we're going to trade off a couple of times, and we're hoping some beautiful connections and overlappings will happen. And if not, too bad. This essay is called Salt Mine. It's I'm going to let it speak for itself. It's new, and you are my debut audience.
Woo!
I'm going to sail around the world on a tall ship, I announced to a friend of a friend over craft cocktails at one of Seattle's ubiquitous hipster bars. Like the ship in the Goonies, he asked. Pretty much. I laughed. 3 masts, over 12,000 square feet of canvas sail, and 175 different lines to pull on. He and I had been working hard to find some common ground, and I figured this would be the connection. We'd talk about places we'd been or always wanted to go, weird foods of the world, or books we'd read set in intriguing foreign lands. I'd never have predicted his reaction. Why? He asked, you can't think of anything better to do? A quick flash of irritation nearly prompted me to ask if that's why he and his wife had that baby he'd just spent 10 minutes showing me pictures of. What? You couldn't think of anything better to do? Instead, I took a calming sip of my cocktail, telling myself the true answer to that hypothetical question would likely be the same for both of us. No, I can't think of anything better. Is there anything better than diving headfirst into some illogical, life-altering, beautifully terrifying adventure? One that indulges all of one's romantic notions while asking, are you tough enough to do this? Little did I know that question would become the measure of my success every day of our 11-month circumnavigation. It planted itself at the forefront the day I boarded the Picton Castle in the toxic, oil-slicked harbor of Suva, Fiji, and it never let up. That first week, I still believed what I'd been told when I laid down my life savings and signed on as part of the crew. We'd be anchored in Suva for a week or two, getting the ship ready. Then we'd loose sail and head for the remote, lush Fijian islands I knew from previous travels. So I didn't mind the 8-hour days of painting, scraping, sanding, oiling, varnishing, lifting, hauling, and cleaning, or the fact that the harbor's water was too filthy for swimming, until that week or two turned into 7. We spent more than 49 days in that dirty harbor doing little more than manual labor. I built muscle, and I sweat, and adjusted to living in a room with 11 men, our only privacy provided by greasy-feeling curtains stretched across our bunks. Turns out, though, that was nothing compared to the issue of using the heads. Pump toilets, again with only a curtain to separate their occupants from highly trafficked breezeways, gusts of wind, and other sailors standing right there waiting their turns. Not to mention the toddler, who no one told us would be on board for the entire voyage. Exactly, what? Who no one told us would be on board for the entire voyage, who had a thing for flinging open the curtain and standing there expectantly, waiting to be told how cute he was. I soon learned that any problem I had with anything stemmed from the fact that I, according to the engineer and the captain, was a princess. The first time the captain flung that insult at me, I noted the pool of sweat drenching the front of my shirt, my grease-crusted fingernails, sunburned shoulders, and paint-streaked forearms. This is me being a princess, I thought. And then who are these people? This isn't a passenger ship, the captain announced. No shit, I thought. If it were, I'd be poolside drinking rum like normal people.
I can't imagine being anywhere with a toddler for that long. Oh. Well, I am going to play a little bit. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to be here. And I'm going to play a little bit with poetry and then some things from my memoir in progress. I want to honor the anniversary of Katrina, because I feel like all of us have journeys, and many people there have never been able to go home. This is a poem called Consider the Waters. Her water broke just before the levees. The warning signals trickling down her thighs had exceeded her expectations, although this was the second time. And she had dammed the passage with sanitary napkins, created a wall that made her waddle, thighs chafed and burning, the dipsy-doodle flesh bulging around her panty lines. The cotton boundaries were no match. The synthetic walls did not hold back this nation's birthing again. Her water broke just before the levees, so she took a shopping cart ride from the brother she'd sometimes been afraid of. He put down the TV he was hauling, saying, "I guess I'll watch the sky to see what news is coming." He asked her to hold on, because he'd already seen too many gray water memories. Hold on. And he started running, humming. Grandmother, he started singing Daddy. He told her to breathe, that he knew about babies coming, and they do all right without water. Her water broke just before the levees, before the sound of betrayal and fear exploded across memory. He told her, hold on. This is for my friend and for other people who might be on journeys where they are traveling without someone who they've loved, because part of life is that we leave it. This is for my friend Nancy Taylor and for her family and friends. It's called Blood Mourning. Faith is the action of waking, of slitting open the wrist of mourning, expecting life to pour out, instead of bleeding your own sorrow across the light. There is not enough color in any of us to paint the sky alone. Hold on to your blood. Save it for the orange of your lover's smile, the tangerine kisses of your children, still huddling within you or blossoming from the ground, so that when you call into the darkness, each night will obey, pulling up her skirt, pushing aside hesitation, facing east to give you the day. There's this song that's been stuck in my head, actually just one part of a song that's been stuck in my head. I know that happens to other people. It's from Sweet Honey in the Rock. And it's just, the line is, I'm wishing that I had memories to, I'm sorry. It's stuck in my head, but I can't quote it. I'm sitting here waiting for memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world with my own eyes. And that's been stuck in my head. And I just want to share from this catalog from Debora Moore's exhibit at the Northwest African American Museum, because I encourage you all, your life will be a better place if you go. I promise you that, because you will see the beauty in the world through her eyes. And I got the gift of writing in response to her work, and so I want to share a couple of those poems from this catalog. So one of the things she has is this wall of bamboo that's gray, glass, and orchids. That's all I'm going to tell you, because you have to go. It's called Ladies' Slippers. Ladies' Slippers. Bamboo dreams of orchid, closes her gray sky eyes, plays tracheal chords, becomes the song of a smile. Closes her gray sky eyes, becomes flutes of freedom, becomes the song of a smile. Kissing black rain and clouds, becomes the flutes of freedom, becomes ghost and goddess. Kissing black rain and clouds, lets her locks be vines, becomes ghost and goddess, plays tracheal chords, lets her locks be vines. Bamboo dreams of orchid. And that's
The ship was beautiful, though, even if she was, in the words of one of the pro crew, a rusty old bitch. Our every other day rowing practices gave me the chance to gaze at her from afar. 8 of us and a coxswain would climb down a rope ladder into one of our launches, a 23-foot wooden monomoy nearly identical to the open boat that took Captain Bligh and 18 other men nearly 4,000 nautical miles from Fijian waters to Indonesia, where all 19 of them landed safely only to die in droves from tropical diseases, and practice rowing in unison. Afterward, we'd tie up for an hour at the run-down, linoleum-covered yacht club, a veritable Shangri-La, given its free lukewarm showers, $1 ice cream, and $3 beers. Whoa, joked the bosun when I ordered a double Maker's Mark neat. It's not that bad, is it? I have 37 bruises on my legs alone, I said, reaching for a handful of curried peanuts. That's salty as fuck, she said, raising her beer in a toast. It was the first encouraging word I'd heard, and I appreciated it, but even if drinking bourbon did make me tough, it had nothing to do with sail training, the thing I'd come here to do and wasn't much good at. We hadn't yet set sail, and already my mantra was something close to, "Dear God, what have I done?" I froze in place every time the captain started yelling during sail handling practice, though I knew all the lines. I knew all my knots, but I couldn't tie them any time I shifted their orientation. I had no upper body strength and even had trouble climbing the rope ladder from the launch into the ship. I was beginning to wonder if I'd make it. Looking across the harbor, I measured the ship's masts between my thumb and forefinger. Up close, they reached 90 feet high. I admired the curve of her bow, the jaboom I'd spent the morning oiling. Squinting, I tried to make out which of our raggedy, tar-stained crew was working aloft, traversing the maze of rigging more casually than I'd yet been able to navigate the walk to and from my bunk. I already knew I'd never be a sailor like the rest of them were sailors. There was a 0% chance I was going to furl sail 90 feet in the air, at night, at sea, in a gale. But I had, just that morning, survived my up and over, a climb above the main yard, over the futtock shrouds and back. And while I truly, truly hated it, returned to the deck, shaking with adrenaline and fighting tears of relief, at least I did not pee myself like that kid in White Squall. That's something, I reminded myself on the muddy walk to the mosquito-infested yacht club shower. For my shipmates, though, climbing was a high and an imperative, proof of their seamanship, evidence of salt. Seamanship, said the captain, is the purpose of sail training. At our very first muster, he stood below the mainmast at midships wearing a white dress shirt, a multicolored sarong, Ray-Bans, and a straw hat, his uniform. That day, he gave a long lecture on what it means to be a good shipmate. We'd learn to trust each other with our lives, he said, and I hoped to God he was being hyperbolic. I was nowhere near ready to consider what life and death situations we might encounter. Yes, I was sick of Suva, but the alternative was going to sea, sailing this ship, crossing oceans, passages that would put us under sail for 5 weeks at a time, a thought more incomprehensible than terrifying and therefore easily dismissed. But I knew a trainee from our ship had been swept overboard in a storm, lost at sea several years prior. Our captain was not the captain on that voyage. He wanted us to know that. What I didn't know, until he told us, was that a sail training ship, much like ours, had gone down recently off the coast of Brazil. Everyone survived, said the captain, because they knew their ship. Because they were mariners, he bellowed. That's what you'll all become by the end of this voyage. I was doubtful and laughed nervously. I hope you're uncomfortable, the captain said, pointedly. I'm glad you're uncomfortable. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing my job. If you believed our pro crew, no one knew as much as the captain. No one was more revered in the culty, incestuous world of tall ships. His crew worked for $500 per month, not expecting more than a random day off here or there, sometimes for years on end. They were there to court the captain's recommendation, which was gold, they said, in the industry. I suspect a few would have gladly drunk cyanide, if that is what the captain required. I was less impressed with his game, noted the way he cultivated an air of intimidation, kept us aware of the hierarchy, seemed to want all of us terrified and simultaneously desperate to please him. He was equally unimpressed with my game. Oh God, he said one morning after I'd cracked another joke, gotten yet another laugh from the crew. You need to be special. True enough. If I couldn't be salty, which I was pretty sure I couldn't, I figured I'd at least be fun. I may have been crazy enough to think I'd win him over eventually. That way I could subvert my anxiety, increasing daily as I failed at every given task. But I ditched that fantasy the first time I was assigned to paint the overheads in the breezeway outside the captain's cabin. I'd been painting for a couple hours, covering the crusted holes and jagged points of rust above my head, trying to ignore the ache in my shoulders and neck while counting down the minutes to our glorious morning break, kaffepause in Danish, when we got to drink abysmally bad coffee and sit for 15 minutes on a hard bench. Give me your brush, barked the captain. I turned to see him standing shirtless in the opening of the watertight door. He wore a pair of weathered Levi's, his calves and feet hidden below the knee-level opening of the door, which gave him the effect of hovering. This was the first time I'd seen so many of his tattoos, or his white chest hair accenting the thick tribal geometry spanning his sternum from shoulder to shoulder, ringing his forearms. The blue ink faded to the color of his jeans. I handed over my paintbrush and he turned it from side to side, disdainful of the paint and the bristles near the handle. There's an art to painting upside down, he said, showing me the technique I'd been using already, if ineffectively. I guess 42 years at sea will teach you a thing or two, I joked. First, painting upside down. Second, what to do when you get dismasted. He'd told us that morning that he'd sailed on 2 different ships that had been dismasted. One of them they'd entirely re-rigged while at sea. That, I thought, is what's salty as fuck. He gave me a hard look before staring off into the near distance. People say he thinks he's God. I'm not God. The sea is God. The ship is God. God is God. I'm only the prophet. I interpret God. Then he hovered silently back to his cabin while I stared, dumbstruck, at the Chinese dragon curling and arching across his back. I spun in a slow circle, desperate not to be the only one who had heard what I'd just heard. As it turned out, the captain did think he was God. He was omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. He did not enjoy comments or suggestions. Questions had to be perfectly timed and forget about contradictions, whether or not they were warranted. Once at a captain's dinner replete with several bottles of wine, I heard him misspeak, say something about Nelson Mandela's role in the American Civil War. We all just let it lie. And he was serious about making sure we stayed uncomfortable. There were weevils in our food and hordes of roaches. Once I cut into a potato and a swarm of baby roaches ran out, crawled up my arm and back into the veggie locker to grow fat and make more babies. Another time I sprayed pesticide into a crack in the scullery door frame and hundreds of them burst forth, covering the wall like something out of a horror movie. The captain walked by as I was flailing in disgust. "What?" he said. "There's roaches?" "Of course there's roaches." I didn't notice I'd begun to grow immune until I'd spent a few months at sea. I was horrified to see a new trainee throw out her salad after I'd picked a roach from the bowl of dressing. "That's salad," I thought, feeling bereft as I watched her scattered bits of lettuce, tomato, and carrot drifting toward the stern. We had just spent 32 days crossing an ocean eating cans of corned meat and fruit cocktail. All the fresh food had run out weeks prior. Later that night, the same woman yelped at something scurrying from her bunk, and I called out, "It's only a roach, don't worry." Bed bugs had infested sometime after we anchored in Vanuatu. There were other discomforts. The toddler, who arose before 6 a.m. and ran laps above our heads, screaming hysterically. His sounds for joy and rage were indistinguishable. One day I counted he had 7 meltdowns between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. And it was decided in Fiji that we needed a ship's cat. It's traditional, the captain and his wife said when they arrived one afternoon with 2 cats that yowled all night at top volume when they were in heat, which seemed like always. They peed in our bunks, shat everywhere but their litter box, and left piles of vomit for us to step in during our hourly barefoot ship checks. And then there was the name calling. We were fucking retards. We were pansies, ingrates, idiots, incompetents, and mushrooms, best kept in the dark and eating shit. Even the captain's wife, who was generally a perfectly nice person, announced on Christmas morning that we were all a bunch of pussies and stomped off to her cabin. She had wanted a sit-down dinner, which the captain canceled due to weather. A few weeks later, at a muster on the quarterdeck, the captain gave a very specious-sounding exegesis of the Latin root of pussy, insisting is not at all pejorative. Even so, it was better to be a pussy than a passenger. That was the worst of all the insults, and often hurled in my direction. Most memorably on the way to Aruba, where our ship would host the Queen of the Netherlands. We stopped to clean the ship for 2 days in Bonaire, one of the world's premier spots for scuba diving. "I love diving the way you people love boats," I told the first mate en route to the island. "I've wanted to visit Bonaire for more than a decade," I said, and he assured me we'd work it out. But my only day off watch put me ashore too late to arrange a dive. On board, our work was all about monkey shine, the captain's words. So with the mate's permission, I missed 3 hours of cleaning and went on a spectacular dive. And to make up for those hours ashore, I polished brass from 5 to 9 p.m. and figured everything was fine, until I was summoned to the captain's office. "Diving?" he shouted, spittle flying. "You went diving? You're a liar," he said. "You promised you'd stand all your watches. None of this shit like in Bali or Cape Town." It's true, I had missed watch in Bali. I was in the hospital with a thank you. With a fever so high it made me faint on deck and caused half my hair to fall out 3 months later somewhere off the coast of Namibia. In Cape Town, I had also missed watch because the first mate had approached me and said we were docked securely and trainees could have as much time in port as they wanted. I took 2 weeks, traveled as far and wide as my rental car would take me. I'd signed on for a travel adventure, after all. The captain did not recall those details, and I couldn't remind him. It was also true. I'd promised to stand all my watches in the Caribbean, but I wasn't convinced an afternoon dive counted as skipping. I'd still put in 8 hours of cleaning. I wouldn't have asked permission to go had we been at anchor. If there were any chance we'd drag and need a full crew to help heave up anchor and handle sails. But none of that mattered. What mattered was I had not put the ship first. I had wanted something special. I'd proven again that I wasn't salty. I was not a mariner. I made the mistake of telling him I figured the mate would have said no if my request were a problem. You shouldn't have asked, the captain roared. You're turning this into a fucking passenger ship. It's as if you'd learned nothing. Even red-faced, apoplectic with anger, he was fascinating. His feelings are hurt, I realized with a start. He wants me to be a tall ship sailor the way he and his pro crew are. He wants me to want that. I pictured him, regal in his raincoat, standing in the skiff with his hands clasped behind his back as it motored from ship to shore. He wanted me to submit to his version of the world. Sitting in that office, cowed into silence, I allowed myself to be yelled at. I let him go until he was spent. But as soon as I stepped outside, walked down the ladder from the quarterdeck and back to the paint locker, I could only think one thing. Bullshit, I said, pouring yellow paint into a yogurt container, stirring in a stream of diesel to thin it. It's not as if I've learned nothing.
Shaking my head thinking about roaches. Just need to let that go before I can read my own shit. So, both have adventures. Thank God mine didn't have roaches in them. Or that would be a very different title for the memoir, which is Coyote Autumn at this point. And I want to share with you, I want to share with you the order that this experience actually happened in. One is, there's an excerpt from it in this anthology called Something to Declare. And then what happens after you get addicted to going to Yellowstone to work. So this is Coyote Autumn. In autumn, Yellowstone blinks her eyes and the scene changes. The waves of heat and summer tourists that tortured the pockmarked face of road across the brows and cheeks of this side of the earth thin out. Yellowstone throws her head back and laughs, shakes the strands of rivers boiling and cooled until the mist strolls in like a sighing man or woman. It is time to mate. And the cry of bugling elks charge the cool navy blue night air with its demands. This is where I was reborn, a Philly girl traveling across the continent on a Greyhound bus, carrying concrete and my father's bones in my memory and in the slowing stride of my hip. This is the place where my baby bones, still soft, were cast into the river. I was a Philly girl floating in the grief of my father's passing and the malignant demise of a 3-year relationship. I was a new Moses waiting to be lifted into the arms of night, falling behind the Gallatin mountain range of Montana and the endless eyes of Wyoming stars as I ran my fingers along new thighs. The warble of air and water passing over rock wove a river's tail around me. The long red fingers of earth rising in spires cradled me, and I placed my tongue in a basket of brightly colored lupine and the red of Indian paintbrush. Florida seems like an unlikely place to remember the story of my time in Wyoming. The sunset and swelling of the water visible from my hotel window seems like an unlikely scene to remind me of the rugged blackness of a 1-ton bison's shoulders, or the canvas of wheat-colored grass that rose and curved like a woman laying on her side. My woman at the time, Linda. Her name means beautiful in Spanish. These are the visions that reached around me, stalking the piece of other sceneries with coyote footsteps and the howl of missing her landscape. In the summer of 1993, I arrived in the gravel parking lot of my seasonal employer, one of 2 concessionaires who harvested the benefit of private amenities on public land through its outcroppings of 3-star restaurants, hotels, and gift shops. Outside of the pristine beauty of Yellowstone, the nation's first national park, new employees were arriving from all parts of the country to be given names, name badges, and polyester uniforms, which scratch. I disembarked from the white school bus that carried us from our pickup point in Livingston, Montana, through the spectacular scenery of jagged mountain peaks and the wild dancing of the Gallatin River along its right side. I stood in the warmth of early July at the employee entrance of the old west town of Gardner, Montana, looking at the stone arch that marked the territorial line of my future. My intention was to be an employee for just one season, to see the majesty of mountains whose photos had been tacked to the wall like an unfamiliar prescription posted in the dinge of the Philadelphia Unemployment Office, where I spent a lot of time. Healing had seemed only footsteps away. I filled out the simple application form, crossed out the box for Black, and wrote in African American. I checked the box for restaurant help, the generic term that signaled to the personnel office that I was willing to do dishes, do anything except clean rooms to work there. I cannot remember meeting Linda. She was like a wind that penetrated my exterior. The man who loved her called her Little Whirlwind, Hutu Dekata, because she danced with all her heart, spinning in circles at the powwow. Little Whirlwind. I called her name in Spanish. Linda, beautiful. Linda, Andrea, coyotes, the Gardner River, Montana, the Boiling River, the Grand Tetons, alligators, Floridas, car crashes, all shout like ghosts from Christmas past with their particular tales that sealed our future. Still, I cannot remember meeting Linda. Perhaps it was during one of her wait shifts. I would have been in the kitchen in the back of the house at Roosevelt Lodge, where I was a dish dog. That's the name that we affectionately called all dishwashers. Perhaps I met her for the first time on the path to the shower house where employees and guests without indoor plumbing crossed pads and towels and uniforms. Perhaps Andrea had introduced us on the porch of the lodge while I sat in one of the carved rocking chairs or outside our cabin that was perched by the creek. It had all begun with Andrea, who had spoken Linda's name into the umbilical cord of the phone line that stretched from the outdoor telephone among the evergreens to my voice waiting to accept another collect call, a bill I did never pay, on the carpet of my Philadelphia apartment. Andrea, with her woolly curls, green eyes, and light skin, who had climbed out of the birth canal of Philadelphia to arrive in Yellowstone 6 weeks before me. We had become twins from different mothers, born in the morning of failed relationships, the call of wild places, and organizing Philadelphia's memorial for Audre Lorde. Andrea's collect calls were breath and water, traveling through the tangled curl of my blue telephone cord to nourish me with tales of sawdust floors and barn dances, used cowboy boots, and roaming bison, and Linda, a new sister friend. What I do remember is the wooden beams of Roosevelt Lodge, the only rustic location in the park, which meant the small employee cabins did not have running water, toilets, or heat, except for that which was generated from the wood-burning stove we stoked at night with logs made from pressed particles of wood. What I do remember is the night that Linda and I climbed the curve of Sagebrush Hill on the side of the employee cabins and sat in the pitch dark and cold with the other employees so that we could look at the untold number of stars and talk. We sat a few steps away from the others and whispered in low voices, shivering from the cold of the air at night and the excitement. I moved closer to her. Chill was the perfect reason to put my thigh next to hers on the makeshift wooden bench. Suddenly, in spite of my adulthood and my work as a poet, I found myself saying, "I like you." She responded simply and warmly, "I like you too." Her words came too easily to carry the weight of my intentions, so I said to my horror, "No, I like you like you." What could be clearer or more embarrassing than that for anyone over the age of 12? It was when she replied, "Oh, well, I don't like you like you." Linda was a petite woman, strong with thin, light brown hair, a small pock mark near the curve of her brow and hairline. She wore pink whenever she wanted to and drove a huge old yellow pickup truck. They didn't have girls like her in Philly. And I imagine picking her up in one arm, something I was fond of doing, but was unable to do with my last lover. In my fantasies, Linda was a real Montana woman with strong, lean muscles that pushed against the seams of her dungarees. She wore with an "I can do it myself" attitude that perturbed other people. The firmness of her voice left no room for maneuvering, but I had sensed her watching me, or imagined her looking at me through her soft hazel eyes. I sat shivering among the sage plants on the hill, holding her rejection for a moment. I was more determined than before to make her like me, like me. And you'll have to hear what she did like me for a while. It's so embarrassing how I got her. You'll have to read that later. But I'm gonna just read this little bit of, so what happens when you fall in love and you live in Philly and you keep going to Montana, you fall in love with mountains and stuff. This is called the Gray Dog. When riding the Greyhound bus, even for short distances, but especially for long hauls, such as 4-night and 5-day journeys across the wind-flattened landscapes of the continental U.S., strategies for survival are required. If at all possible, travel with a friend. The journey from Philadelphia to Livingston, Montana will make you question reality. Like the first time you actually saw a tumbleweed bouncing down the highway, you kept saying, "Wait, is that real?" Since you've never actually seen a tumbleweed except in a John Wayne movie or the TV show Big Valley that came on after school. If you and your friend are successful at wrangling seats together, you will be sleeping next to each other in a sitting position longer than you thought humanly possible. If you're not successful, a sense of doom may overtake you since no one will change seats, thereby allowing you to sit next to one another. Because you look like a normal person, a stranger has decided that you are their only hope for not having to sit next to the other people boarding the bus behind you. You can't blame them. Let's be clear. Even in this modern age, the steps to surviving the journey before you leave the city you've grown up in, there are steps. 1, call the Greyhound bus station and ticket sales office at least 5 times until you get the same answer to your travel questions at least twice. These are your best odds and your only hope of arriving at work in a different time zone on the day and location required by your seasonal employer. After all, departing on East Coast time and arriving on Mountain Standard Time, traveling through another time zone is like being on the Star Trek Enterprise in slow motion. Clearly, it is too much to calculate for the customer service representatives that are trying to assist you. However, know that your employer, TW Services, doesn't care why you are late. You will be fired and stuck in Montana with no money and no place to live. So, if you hope to keep the restaurant job you've been hired to do for the winter in Yellowstone, call again and again, listen carefully, do the math yourself, check the dates and the bus transfers, and you will be on your way. 2, be ruthless. Who you let sit next to you should you be separated from your traveling companion could break you. Mind, body, and spirit in the first 100 miles of the 2,000 miles ahead of you. Under no circumstances should you let the person with the giant cooler of chicken sit near you. You only have limited funds, and the smell of homemade delicious meals will torment you as you break open the pack of garlic rice cakes and bite the mushy red apple that your friend thought was a good treat since both of you need to eat healthier. Also, you will want to avoid the large man with denim overalls that seems to be waddling towards you when you're already squished in the back seat. He thinks you ladies look vulnerable. The two of you, legs akimbo, as you try to take as much room as possible in the row of the 3 seats next to the toilet that you thought was a good place to sit before you sat there. The smell is not the problem. People coming and going at all hours is not the problem. Your seats are not as roomy as it seems because your chairs don't recline. But the people in front of you, theirs do. That is the problem. Your only chance of survival is to act like hostile black women from Philly. As the man turns sideways to squeeze his belly over the row of seats in front of you, you must not only give him the don't even think about it look, but you must also say the words out loud. Use your eyebrows to gesture to the meek traveler sitting alone 2 rows up. As the large man in denim overalls turns his behind to you while walking up the aisle towards the meek soul, you will know you've done the right thing. The smell of the brown spot on his clothing was not your imagination or the toilet. You will be glad that you followed your instinct. Nonetheless, your seat is still too small, and I'll read the rest when I come back.
I know now what it's like to stand at forward lookout at 3 a.m. in the middle of the Indian Ocean, to go nearly a month without hearing the sound of a plane or a car or a train or a television or a radio, to not be able to remember the last time I saw a light from land or another ship, or even a satellite gliding across the sky, to have no sound exist in the world except the creaking of the rig as we cut through the sea and the wind in starlit sails. I know what it's like to see the Milky Way, 200 billion stars laid out like a shimmering blanket across the sky, with no moon even to dim the light of the universe. On those nights, what you do is lean into the rhythm of the ship's rolling, let your body balance in opposition, watch for the glinting bioluminescence in the wake of her hull, realize that it's only a piece of metal holding you above water 12,000 feet deep, spanning 3,000 miles on either side of you. 20% of the Earth's water, and you're in the middle of it. There could be no rescue here if something went wrong. But that thought doesn't enter your mind. All you feel is the magnitude of the simplicity of your surroundings, that contradiction contained in the fine grit of salt on your skin. This could be the night when the dolphins come trailing streaks of phosphorescence like glittering neon torpedoes. Or maybe you'll see them nearer the equator in the daylight, leaping and spinning in synchronized groups and pairs. Maybe you'll see a seabird instead a tern or an albatross riding a current of wind, grazing the tip of a wing across a sea so calm you can see the line it carves, rippling into the blue. Maybe that will be the night you've heard about, when the sea is so flat you can see the reflection of stars in the undulating, endless water. I was at the helm not far from Fiji the first time it hit me, the reality of what I was actually doing. I laughed out loud and called to the mate. I'm steering a tall ship in the world's largest ocean at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. As you do, he said, flashing a smile. Even as it was happening, I realized I'll remember this moment forever. And after a moment like that, you know that no one who hasn't done it herself will ever fully understand what it feels like to spot the coast of Africa, having truly earned the view of those brown cliffs. I didn't know they were there until the sun rose over a foggy morning, and there it was, land, mountains, reaching into clouds that hadn't yet burned off. I couldn't stop saying it. Africa. We sailed to Africa, the motherland. It didn't feel real until I remembered the sweat, the blood, the rage and the vomit, the tears of frustration, my hands full of blisters, and my mangled feet. Somehow I felt that price was fair for the privilege of seeing, I got emotional. There you go. Somehow I felt that price was fair for the privilege of seeing the world from this point of view. Hardly anyone on earth gets to have this, I thought. This is living. The captain turned out to be right about that, and infuriatingly about many other things. But I was never a passenger. I was one of only 2 trainees to make the entire voyage. I was there, doing it. Some days better than others, maybe. Still, I did it. Yes, the engineer continued to call me Barbie. And no, I was never able to climb to the royal yard. I never made it past the main. I did not get to be the best sailor. But by the end, I could climb from the monomoy into the ship without even using the rope ladder. I turned out to be good at splicing and making grommets. I began to think quickly, even amidst the yelling. Once, I single-handedly sweated the topgallant halyard, a line that raises the yard, that sets a sail, that helped carry us across the next ocean, closer to home. I've been telling people I don't think I have PTSD, but I seriously have PTS. So I apologize. There's I'm going to get a sound bath. I'm hoping for some psychic healing. Anyway, starting over. By the end, I could climb from the monomoy into the ship without even using the rope ladder. I turned out to be good at splicing and making grommets. I began to think quickly, even amidst the yelling. Once, I single-handedly sweated the topgallant halyard, a line that raises the yard, that sets a sail, that helped carry us across the next ocean, closer to home, with every nautical mile. I threw all my weight and muscle into a job that usually takes 2 and told the 2 men standing by to back off. I am doing this, I shouted. I was strong enough, I realized, even before I'd finished. So annoying. All right. I'll never be a person who finds joy in bending on a jib at 2 a.m. in a rainstorm. I will forever be the first to set down my chipping hammer and run to the rail when there are dolphins off the starboard bow. I will always love what's beautiful more than what's difficult, but I will slog through swarms of roaches to reach it. The captain said it himself after I steered the ship through a series of squalls in the North Atlantic. Nicole, he said, looking me straight in the eye, you're a good helmsman. Finally, I got what I wanted from him, but by then, I didn't need it.
Nonetheless, your seat is too small. The spatial problem will be more of an issue in a couple of hours while your friend is sleeping. You think it's a good idea to get off the bus at the rest stop. It's the middle of the night. The lights at the convenience store dazzle you. That is one of the excuses you will use for drinking a Mountain Dew at 1 a.m. Your friend, who is curled into the shape of a soft pretzel, has finally fallen asleep. She will not care that you picked the soda because it reminds you of your childhood, even when you describe the long brown soda machine that looked like a refrigerator / treasure chest with the silver bottle opener attached to it. She will care even less that the soda machine was at Alice's beauty parlor where you used to spend hours getting your hair straightened, or the glass bottle you remember had a hillbilly on it, and that it was a frosted white image of a man with short pants and big toes leaping into the air, and it seemed just perfect. Your friend will never forget that sleepless night. 3, recognize your folly. You have chosen to go by bus 2,000 miles across country again for the 3rd time in fewer than 8 months. This is not the biggest act of foolishness. It is that you think you have it all figured out. Not just you, but your traveling companion thinks so too. It is, after all, the second carefree. It is, after all, Not just you, but your traveling companion thinks so too. It is, after all, the second time the two of you are leaving Philadelphia to go to work in Wyoming. She's pleased with herself and carefree as she arrives empty-handed, ready to travel after harrowing experiences of seeing luggage left on the ground at the wrong station on your last journey. You're glad to see her because her hands are free, and you are carrying a human-sized bag of popcorn that you got at the dollar store. What a deal, you thought. $1, you say, as she moans, and you say, great, your hands are free. Can you carry this? While shoving your extra suitcase and the popcorn at her. Your friend says she doesn't even like popcorn. That's not what you remember. The popcorn needs its own seat, but does not have a ticket. So the first 100 miles or so, you carry it on your lap, off to the side, like a large pillow, or a child, until you can eat it down to a size that can be shoved into the overhead bin. You are pleased with yourselves. You have scored the front seats right out of the Philadelphia bus terminal. No one in front of you, room to put your chairs back this time. You can put your feet up on the handrail above the steps, take off your shoes, finally relax. See the open road straight ahead of you. Hum Simon and Garfunkel tunes about being homeward bound. You think you are safer now from big men with butt-stained denim until the pale bus driver says, feet. I love feet. I have a thing for feet. Your toes curl as though a house had just fallen on you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys very, very much. And it's funny, when we started this place 12 years ago, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. That was the obvious part. But we sort of had some vision that someday this would happen, that the community would come together and fill this room with art and kindness and support. And it's so cool to see it actually happening. I'm not here every time, but when I see it, it's really heartwarming. It reminds me why we're here. So thank you so much to you guys for making it happen. Yeah. I didn't discover poetry till I was 30. I was old. And I discovered it because I got my heart broke. And somehow my heartbreak took me to Pablo Neruda. And naturally so, I guess. And so this is one of my favorite Neruda poems. Lost in the forest, I broke off a dark twig and lifted its whisper to my thirsty lips. Maybe it was the voice of the rain crying, a cracked bell, or a torn heart. Something from far off, it seemed deep and secret to me, hidden by the earth, a shout muffled by huge autumns, by the moist, half-open darkness of the leaves. Wakening from the dreaming forest there, the hazel sprig sang under my nose, its drifting fragrance climbed up through my conscious mind, as if suddenly the roots I had left behind cried out to me, the land I had lost with my childhood, and I stopped, wounded by the wandering scent. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for being here. We're just going to do a abbreviated Q&A, ask you maybe one question that you can both answer, and then see if there's any questions from the audience, which I think are always kind of exciting, because these you might have an idea about, but those you don't know anything about. So both of you clearly, I mean, I know you had said you were a little nervous. Would your work go together well? And I think it went together fantastically, really beautifully. You both write about the natural world, and you both write about travel. So could you talk about your evolving connection with the natural world or with travel? When did you first understand the role of nature or travel in your life as a writer and as a woman? You can take anything from that you want and make it your own.
I have a ready answer for you. My memoir, Confessions of a Latter-day Virgin, basically evolves around my changing faith. I grew up in the Mormon church and eventually found that it was unexpectedly falling apart for me. And as my religion was kind of crumbling, I found a beautiful way to commune and to be spiritual underwater. I'm an avid scuba diver, and I think at that time in my life there was just so many people talking to me and about what I should think and what I should do and how I should act and blah blah blah, and I didn't know what to think, but all I knew was I felt at peace underwater, and there was just silence, and all you can hear is kind of your heart beating, and it really is a whole different world. You feel like you're on a different planet under there, and I felt this sense of homecoming. And I think that's a big part of what drew me to this sail around the world, is I just wanted to be back in the ocean in some way or another. And I wanted to stop talking about sex and Jesus. And so there were both of those benefits to me.
Sex and Jesus are my favorite topics.
I forgot the question. But, well, travel is definitely a huge influence, but mostly because I'm a very romantic person, and a lot of the romance that I carry comes from songs, which I have no idea how I'm going to be able to weave as many copyrights that I'd like to request into my memoir, because Simon and Garfunkel songs, all these songs that made me feel like, go, travel across, ride this Greyhound bus, have this experience. And I guess I inserted myself into these places that I didn't realize were just like an outline for white men. So I had a very different experience of that same journey. A lot of it was hilarious, and a lot of it was just stunning. And so, but I had done that before. I thought, I'll hike to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I didn't know that it was only a mile, but what that mile really meant. That's how little I knew. That I hiked down and back out, and I was younger, clearly. And so those things influenced me, like these romantic visions of traveling, but then actually being there and seeing it and falling in love with having conversations with people, moving away from the TV and the movies.
I think I fall victim to the romanticism of all of it too. I mean, we were at the same captain's dinner I told you about with Nelson Mandela in the. Anyway, everyone kind of talked about what brought us to the ship, and I said I make impulsive decisions and I have very romantic notions. And I think that along with anything else, and of course, like I had a whole different experience than all these, white men who like, oh, I will chase the whale or I will explore or whatever. But that doesn't mean anything really, because we make our own adventure, we make our own explore. It's about exploration for whatever that brings to you. Do you agree?
Well,
You're like, no.
no, I do agree. And when you were crying at the end and talking about that journey, I mean, I went to Africa on a plane, and we were like, oh, hell no, we have been on this plane forever. And for me, of course, that's an ancestral journey. And the broadside I brought has an image I would like to give you. Yeah, because many people who were taken from different parts of the continent, that was a long journey. And they were thrown overboard.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of history in that.
Yeah, we sailed the friggin' Middle Passage, and as we were doing it, I'm like, we're sailing the Middle Passage,
Yeah.
and I wished that I had paid more attention in history class. Like, I want to go back and.
They didn't say anything.
Maybe
We were paying attention, I'm sure. You just didn't really bring it up. But I think I think as women, traveling places where the story and the narrative is, this is what a man experiences, even though it doesn't have that label on it, somehow we ingested that. God help you, roaches, man. That's disgusting. But you know what I mean? That's for me. I think travel, and where else do you leave? You leave the city.
Yeah, and I feel like, I am guilty of having a pretty sheltered and small experience growing up. And of course, the more and more I traveled, the more and more I realized that, like, a lot of stuff I was told doesn't apply. Your world gets bigger, your insight gets bigger, your empathy gets bigger, and you're like, wait a minute, now I have to rethink everything. And for a lot of people, that's really scary. And for me, that's the only thing that doesn't make me feel like I'm suffocating.
Rethinking everything?
Yeah.
I had this moment where I realized I love Cat Stevens. This is a lot to confess, but I love Cat Stevens. And there was a moment when I was carrying my bicycle upstairs in Philadelphia and like questioning my life, and I was like, wait a minute, I don't have anything to give up. I'm not this white guy with, it was this moment, all these things that I was throwing the shackles off. Not that I didn't have a totally privileged existence. If anybody hears this, they'll be like, she's lying. I totally had a privileged existence. However, I didn't have the white male privileged existence that was part of that song, but still, it unshackled me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and also what I think is when I'm telling people that I'm traveling around the world, they're like, oh my God, why? But I feel like if I were a man and I was saying, I'm going to go sail the world, no one would ask why. They would just be like, awesome, when do you leave?
Right.
Like, I feel like, I don't know, I take issue with, like, does an experience affect me more because I'm a woman? Whatever, we're all just living our lives. But I feel like certain experiences you have to justify if you're female, that, like, it doesn't occur to anyone
That you would have it, that you would claim it.
Yeah, like.
You'd be interested in doing it.
Right.
And so, like, that part was weird, because everyone's like, this whole why, and I'm like, because I'm saving the world. Like, why?
Why not?
Why the why?
Because why not?
Yeah.
When I said I was going to Wyoming, I was in therapy, not because I was going to go to Wyoming, but because my father passed and all that, and I was grieving stuff, and I told my therapist, and she was also African-American woman, and she's like, no, don't go, you're running away. And I was like, I want to have an adventure. And she was like, people don't know where Wyoming is. And they were worried that I didn't come back. I got cards. Seriously, there's a Garfield card about where is Wyoming, and do you know anyone who's ever been there? And do you know anyone who's come back? So, okay,
That's pretty good.
Well, I hope that you both come back here. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.